Good afternoon and welcome to the press conference of the G20 Finance Ministers and Central Bank Governors meeting under the Italian G20 presidency. The conference will be held by the Italian Minister of Economy and Finance, Daniele Franco, and the Governor of the Bank of Italy, Ignazio Visco. Also at the table, Alessandro Rivera, Director General of the Treasury, Luigi Federico Signorini, Senior Deputy Governor of the Bank of Italy, and Angela Barbaro, Head of Communication of the Bank of Italy. Minister Franco and Governor Visco will make the opening statements, after which we'll have a Q&A session only on the issues of the G20. The statements will be delivered in English, and we kindly recommend to ask your questions in English as well. We also ask you to come here to the microphone, on my right. Questions are also possible through video link. Italian translation is available through the Converso app. Minister Franco, the floor is yours.
So thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Today, the G20 finance minister and central bank governors met for the third time this year, and it is the first time that we could meet in person. At least most of us were here. And we agreed on a number of important commitments which are detailed in the official communique, which is being released right now. And before addressing your questions, I'll try to give you an overview of today's discussion. Then the governor will share his remarks right after mine. First point, the economic outlook. Since the previous meeting in April, the outlook has improved, especially in some advanced countries. And this is also related to the progress in vaccination and the policy support. The recovery, however, remains uneven. Some countries are lagging behind. There are downside risks related to different paces of vaccination and also to the possible spread of new variants. So against this background, we reiterated our commitment to use all available tools for as long as required to sustain the recovery, avoiding any premature withdrawal of support measures. Second, the G20 recognizes COVID-19 immunization as a global public good and reiterates its support for all collaborative efforts, especially the so-called ACTA mechanism, in order to address the current health crisis, urging both the public and the private sector to address the remaining gaps. Ministers and governors recognized the need to accelerate the delivery of vaccines, diagnostic and therapeutics to rapidly react to new variants and to provide countries support in delivering and distributing vaccines. We took note of an important initiative that is the formation of a joint task force by the World Bank, the IMF, WHO, WTO, to help track, coordinate, and advance the delivery of COVID-19 health tools. We will keep working on this issue in the coming months and reach, I guess, additional decisions in October in the next meeting. Again, on health-related issues, yesterday we welcomed the report of the G20 high-level independent panel on financing global commons for pandemic preparedness and response and discussed its recommendations. As a follow-up, the G20 will continue to work together with international financial institutions and relevant partners, in particular the WHO, to develop proposals for strengthening future pandemic preparedness and response. We are setting up a group of experts from finance ministries and health ministries together with international economic institutions, the WHO, to prepare concrete proposals to be presented in October at a joint finance and health ministry meeting to take place at the end of October, just before the head of government meeting. Fourth, on international taxation, we achieved an important, a very important agreement. Many colleagues define it a historic agreement on a more stable and fairer international tax architecture. We endorsed the key components of the two pillars on the allocation of taxing rights on profits of multinational enterprises and the global minimum effective corporate taxes. The G20 agreement is an important achievement that will contribute to stabilize the international tax system in the coming years. It will grant greater tax certainty and stop the race to the bottom with respect to corporate tax rates. Additional work is necessary between here and October to fully finalize the agreement. There are a number of technical details to be fully finalized, and we plan to do so at the end of October. Again, finance ministers, central bank governors also discussed how to best continue supporting vulnerable countries through a comprehensive support package. The DSSI has achieved significant results. 45 countries requested its benefits. Now that the DSSI nears its end, the common framework has been activated to address debt vulnerabilities. As you know, in the previous meeting, there was a decision about a new allocation of special drawing rights, $650 billion. We expect this allocation to be effective in late August, and members agreed to work with the IMF to narrow down the design and implementation details of a few options to channel SDRs from countries who do not need them to countries in need. Today, ministers and governors also agreed to launch an independent review of multilateral development banks' capital adequacy frameworks. The G20 ministerial meeting was also an opportunity to discuss a range of challenges that date from before the pandemic and go beyond the short term. For instance, we endorsed the G20 menu of policy options on digital transformation and productivity recovery. And we also worked on infrastructure investment, and we endorsed the G20 policy agenda on infrastructure maintenance. Finally, we agreed on the need to foster a just transition toward low-carbon economies and societies through the adoption of well-coordinated, comprehensive strategies. On the climate-related policy, yesterday we hosted here the G20 high-level tax symposium on tax policies and climate change, which offered an important opportunity to discuss what the international tax architecture can do to mitigate climate change. We believe that tax policy could have a critical role in achieving environmental goals. Tomorrow we will reconvene here for an international climate conference to further explore climate-related issues. I will now give the floor to Governor Visco.
Thank you, Daniele. Well, I will briefly summarize what we have discussed and convened with respect to the sustainable finance issue, regulatory finance, what the changes in the regulation, and other financial issues. The first thing I would like to say is that the activities of the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group are now really starting, and they are developing in very fast in a direction which is very important. This group is co-chaired by China and the United States, and it benefits from the support of international organizations, financial sector networks, and private sector representatives. The progress it is making has to do with, first of all, the development of a multi-year roadmap, roadmap on sustainable finance, which certainly includes how to deal with climate change and sustain the challenges that come from climate change, but goes also beyond that. It is not limited to the climate, even if this is the most pressing issue that relates to the sustainability of our economies. Obviously, under the label of sustainability, we have development, we have society, and so there are issues which will also be considered over time by this group that is going to remain working for the G20. The roadmap that's been put forward by the group can be divided in a number of areas. The first has to do with how to align financial flows with sustainability objectives. Second is really to provide reliable and timely information on the risks related to sustainability, on the opportunities, and on impacts of changes. The third has to do with the assessment and management of climate and sustainability risks. The fourth is to leverage public finance and incentives in order to meet the objectives that we establish over time. And the fifth concerns cross-cutting elements such as the potential effects of fintech solutions for sustainable finance. There will be a synthesis report and the roadmap that will be delivered in October. We concur that quality data and comparable frameworks for disclosure are crucial for addressing climate-related financial risks and mobilizing sustainable finance. Then we discussed two Financial Stability Board reports. The first concerns the availability of data for financial institutions to monitor and assess climate-related risks to financial stability. Basically, there are many data gaps, and especially in a number of countries, there are no resources really to collect information, so you need a cooperative approach to that, and there is a commitment to working to address existing data gaps with the support of the Financial Stability Board and other relevant bodies in helping financial authorities to make use of scenario analysis through that which utilizes this data, the collection of this data. The second report has to do with the promotion of climate-related disclosures. In our discussion, we agreed on the objective of achieving globally consistent, comparable, and reliable climate-related disclosures from corporations. We welcome the Financial Stability Board's recommendations for financial authorities to promote a high-quality and consistent implementation of disclosure requirements and guidance, and these will build on the task force on climate-related financial disclosure that works within the FSB and its indications in line with the jurisdictions, different jurisdictions, legal and regulatory frameworks. It is a work that will contribute to a more uniform approach among national and regional financial authorities, so to pave the way for future coordination at the global level in the efforts towards developing a baseline global reporting standard. And in this respect, we have been considering and welcoming the program of the IFRS Foundation, which is developing a baseline global reporting standard under robust governance and public oversight, building upon the task force framework and the work of sustainability standard setters. There was also welcoming the roadmap that the Financial Stability Board put forward to address climate-related risks to financial stability, which sets out priority actions and indicative timeframes that will be followed during the coming years under the chairmanship of the different countries that will take over. The interesting thing is that there are two roadmaps and there should be no confusion between the two. One is the roadmap of the Sustainable Finance Working Group, and the other is the roadmap of the Financial Stability Board. The second really has a very limited and deep objective, that of assessing the risks and ensuring the maintenance of financial stability that may be affected by climate change. And so in this sense, it will, the disclosures, the data, the filling of data gaps, this definition of the effects, stress testing, if you want, of risks coming from climate change on the balance sheets of financial intermediaries and so on is really the object of this work and the roadmap that will be followed. The other, as I said, is wider in scope. It considers what kind of instruments can be used to obtain the objectives. It has to do with a wider definition of sustainability. It includes, for example, biodiversity. Over time, we will have also that kind of nature and biodiversity objectives. The interesting thing is that we have decided that these roadmaps are living instruments for progressing work, so they will be adjusted flexibly as priorities evolve over time. And basically, this is simply the realization, the fact that climate change in this case is something that has to be monitored constantly in terms of both the targets and the results in using the instruments that we will define. The financial regulation side had been developed discussing two reports. One, an interim report by the FSB on the lessons learned from the pandemic from a financial stability perspective. So the lesson learned, basically how banks were able to face the shocks that came from the pandemic, so their resilience and so on, and also what we have learned about the non-bank financial sector turmoil, the liquidity strains that we observed, for example, in March last year, and which have been addressed through central bank interventions, either directly or indirectly. And these lessons will be the starting point that will be put together, inclusive of what we are going to observe this year for a final report that will be presented to the summit. The other report has to do directly on non-bank financial intermediation, and it is a consultation report that sets out policy proposals to enhance money market funds resilience. Money market funds really were the one who most showed the largest, highest volatility in the spring of last year. And we concurred with the main messages from the review of the lessons learned from the pandemic, even if we said that they are still tentative, because clearly the health crisis is not yet over. The G20 financial regulatory firms following the global financial crisis have played a key role in putting banks on a sounder footing, and this has been recognized by all, both the capital ratios being sufficiently high, the buffers being used there, banks acting this time as a cushion, not an amplifier of the shocks, even if it was noted that there is a need now to complete the remaining elements of the reform package, including Basel III. At the same time, the review brings to the light the need for further scrutiny of some aspects of the functioning of the regulatory frameworks, and basically trying to understand whether the use of capital and liquidity buffers is efficient, can be used efficiently, the performance of countercyclical elements in prudential regulation, potential remaining sources of excessive procyclicality. All issues that will be explored further before putting them in the report that will be finalized for the Leaders' Summit in October. Now, as I was saying, the pandemic basically, however, has shown us that there are aspects of somehow vulnerabilities that may persist in certain segments of the non-bank financial intermediation, which basically now covers around 50% of the total intermediation of the financial sector. And so in this sense, the idea is to try to find out ways to somehow reinforce the ability of this sector to face shocks while preserving the benefits, its benefits. I said something about the money market fund sector, the fact that this is certainly an area which does not exhaust all what we have to do on the non-bank financial intermediation sector. There are issues related to liquidity enhancing in, for example, open-ended funds and so on. These will be taken over, even if will not be in the report that will be finalized in October. We also agreed with the main messages of another progress report that had to do with the transition from LIBOR towards robust alternatives that will substitute LIBOR in the course of the year. And what is interesting, we discussed at length the financial inclusion agenda. This obviously has a different considerations and effects according whether you are in emerging and developing countries and whether you are in advanced economies, but the two issues which have to do with with consumer protection on the financial side and with the literacy with which households and small micro firms and so on need to have to use the digital instruments that also in the financial sector are being developed in the most recent years are two concerns which are really crucial. The final thing that was discussed had to do with the combat money laundering and countering terrorist financing, and also the environmental crime, which is an object that is being dealt with by the Financial Action Task Force, and there was an agreement at the end to somehow enhance the work done at the regional level by the various bodies that apply standards which have been developed by the FATF or GAFI, as you want to call it. I think that this concludes more or less what we have discussed on the financial side, and obviously we are open to take your question and answer them.
Thank you, Governor. Now we have the Q&A session. The first question, Laura Serrano Conde, FM. Please.
Hello, everybody. I have a question for the Minister Franco. I would like to know, Minister, if you think it would be possible to convince reticent countries in the EU, like Ireland, to join the global tax agreement, and how? Thanks.
The so-called inclusive framework at the OECD involves 139 countries, of which 132 agreed on a document. So we have 7 countries missing in the sense that they did not agree. 3 of them are Europeans, Hungary, Estonia, and Ireland. All G20 countries agreed on the inclusive framework. And I think our ambition is that to reach an agreement, of all countries. Obviously, each country can decide whether to agree or not. But having the G20, first of all, and 132 countries agreeing, representing more than 90% of worldwide GDP. This obviously put pressure on whole country to join. So what we hope is that the agreement at the global level will create conditions within Europe to reach an agreement, a full agreement within the European Union. I should stress that, tax systems reflects the history of each country, they reflect the characteristic features of each country. So to accept global rules is for each country difficult. Each country has to be prepared to, in a way, to compromise, to have worldwide rules for taxing multinationals, for taxing the profits of big companies. Is a major change, is a major achievement. What we saw within the G20 is really the strong political will to reach an agreement. All countries, in a way, gave up to some of their wishes, and I think that this approach of, let's say, cooperation, which is essential in a globalized world. We live in a globalized world. We cannot have rules in a way which are very different from country to country, since our companies operate basically worldwide. So we saw a lot of cooperation, a lot of political will, a lot of technical work, and we should really thank the OECD for the great work which has been done. Several delegations today repeated that. This is a collective effort. This is a collective work. Obviously it happens with the Italian presidency, and we are very happy about that. We did our best to carry it out, but this is a collective effort involving the OECD and all the countries. So to come back to the question, I hope that the countries which have so far decided not to join will modify their views.
Thank you, Minister. Next question, Domenico Conti, ANSA. Here to the microphone, please.
Good afternoon. Thanks for this occasion. I have a question for Governor Visco. In your speech yesterday, Mr. Governor, you mentioned the world economy being in uncharted waters. And you also said that it's difficult to foresee what it will look like in a few years. It's difficult to imagine exactly. We are in a particular phase. Can you elaborate further on this, and especially with a view to an issue that you mentioned yesterday, the risk of divergent growth paths between developed countries and poorer countries, and also perhaps within the Eurozone, despite many measures that have been deployed. Thank you very much.
Yes, well, first of all, the divergence is something that relates to what we discussed yesterday on the way different parts of the world are reacting to the pandemic. Obviously, we have been able to, thanks to the vaccination campaign in a number of countries, really to go back to almost normal operations. This is not true everywhere, and even in our countries there are differences across sectors. What I wanted to say about the uncharted waters is that there are a number of developments that combine changes. The changes in the way production activity takes place, and changes in which households react in their habits, consumption habits, and so on, and in the use of new instruments, such as the digital instruments which has been accelerated very much. This is uncharted, and in fact, today's discussion was very interesting when we somehow considered the issues related to financial inclusion, because there are areas in which clearly literacy is not there to use the instruments efficiently, in which there are infrastructures which still are lacking, and so there is a lot of work which has to be put together also in advanced economies. The new normal has to do with the way habits will change, how we consume, what we consume, the way the interaction will take place. I mean, you all have a mask. We hope that soon this will be less of a constraint, but there will be scars remaining, and the scars have effects on consumption, effects on the way we need to remove the uncertainty. In the meanwhile, this has implied a response on the fiscal side, which cannot remain forever, so we will have to adjust. So in this sense, we have to learn by doing. Overall, I think the important response from this meeting is that there is awareness and there is agreement to work together in these waters which still are to be defined. There has been an observation that it is important, the destination, but the transition is even more important. And so we have to still to be prepared to meet the objectives that we want, that is a return to normality, a different normality, I suppose.
Thank you, Governor. Gavin Jones, Reuters.
Yeah, hello. I have a question for Minister Franco. You mentioned earlier the possibility of COVID variants. But don't you agree that these COVID variants are already spreading very fast and they represent a major risk to derailing the economic recovery? And why hasn't the G20 here pledged more money to the WHO's program to provide vaccines and equipment to the poor countries which are most vulnerable to those variants?
Well, I think indeed you are touching an issue of great concern for the G20. As I said earlier, the global economy is recovering and things are, I would say, going relatively well. The major source of uncertainty is related to the pandemic and to the new variants. I think we all agree that we should avoid, introducing again heavy restrictions on the movement of citizens, on the way of life of people. To do so, the only, in a way, answer is vaccination, and this is the only, I would say, the main tool that we can use. And if population is immunized, the spread of the variants will be reduced and less likely. And then even if people get infected, the mortality rate is much lower. Now, the issue so is vaccination in our country here, but basically all over the European Union, we have about 60% of the population which have received at least one dose of the vaccine. I think that for poor low-income countries, the percentage is very, very low. Probably it's about 1%. So G20 members are concerned with that. This was the issue that was discussed also in previous meetings. The idea is to work through the ACTA, then its vaccine pillars COVAX. G20 members pledged more than $8 billion and committed to share this year nearly 500 million doses of vaccines. But so far, COVAX has distributed only 100 million. Why so? I don't think it's only a matter, or primarily a matter of funding. I think there is an issue of availability of production of vaccine. We should step up production and then make sure that the products are circulated, distributed worldwide. I think the basic idea up to some time ago was that the current production level would have been sufficient. Now the new variants are raising increasing uncertainty, and so this is an area where we should focus. The initiative that I was referring earlier on of the IMF, WHO, WTO, the World Bank, moves in that direction of monitoring what is going on, putting pressure on governments and ensuring that vaccines are more readily distributed. The IMF is suggesting that we should mobilize $50 billion for that, and that the target should be reaching for each country a 40% at least vaccination rate by the end of this year. And this would require quite a large increase in the number of vaccines. Certainly this is the crucial issue, and we decided, as I said earlier, to work together on this and speed up production, speed up monitoring, circulation, distribution, and in case increase funding. And we will come back to this issue in October.
Thank you, Minister. Giampiero Scarpati, RAI.
Buonasera a tutti. Io volevo porre due domande in italiano al Ministro dell'Economia Franco e al Governatore Visco. Al Ministro Franco vorrei chiedere di specificare meglio il concetto di accordo storico di cui si parla nel comunicato, perché questo è un accordo storico, e al Governatore Visco volevo chiedere quanto è importante questo accordo sotto il profilo della concorrenza tra le imprese e anche dell'equità sociale, visto che le risorse sottratte alle tasse, alla tassazione, sono risorse della comunità. Grazie.
Well, I'll answer first in English, and then maybe I will repeat it in Italian. So why this agreement is historic. As I said earlier, we are in a way defining for the first time worldwide rules for great large companies. The two pillars envisage two rules. The first one is about the allocation of profits of big multinational enterprises. The idea is that multinational enterprises with a turnover greater than $20 billion will be subject to this new scheme, and profits in excess of 10% of turnover will partly be allocated to other countries, the countries in which the multinational would operate. The second pillar is about setting a minimum tax rate for multinational, in this case multinationals with a turnover of at least 750 million. Don't remember whether it is dollars or euro, Fabrizia. Euro. Okay, sorry, it's euro. And the minimum rate would be 15%. It is historic because this rule would apply worldwide, and this would increase tax certainty for multinational operating in a number of countries. Then a certain part of the excess profit in excess of 10% of turnover, will be distributed to the other countries. What percentage? Well, the agreement so far says between 20 and 30%. Obviously, this is one of the aspects that will have to be clarified before the end of October. So it is historic because we have rules for big companies worldwide. Lo dirò in italiano, per la prima volta abbiamo delle regole che fissano delle regole di tassazione per le grandi multinazionali. Le regole sono due. Innanzitutto si stabilisce che i profitti delle grandi multinazionali in eccesso di una certa quota del 10% del fatturato siano ridistribuiti ai paesi in cui queste multinazionali vendono, operano. Questo riguarda tutte le grandi multinazionali, ma che comprendono anche le multinazionali cosiddette del settore digitale. Però l'accordo non riguarda specificamente il settore digitale, riguarda tutte le grandi multinazionali. La seconda regola prevede che le multinazionali con un fatturato superiore ai 750 milioni di euro siano tassate con un'aliquota almeno del 15%. E questo dovrebbe interrompere quella che è ridurre i margini per la concorrenza fiscale, quella che, usando un termine inglese, si chiama race to the bottom, la gara verso il basso, verso aliquote di imposizione più basse. E questo dovrebbe portare a un sistema impositivo mondiale più equo, soprattutto per il primo pilastro, ma in parte anche per il secondo pilastro, e un sistema più coordinato dove vi è meno concorrenza fiscale. Non è che la concorrenza fiscale viene abolita, ma viene in qualche modo regolata.
I don't have much to add to this. Clearly, two things. First of all, it provides a level playing field, which is fundamental to reduce distortions. And secondly, it really fights the market concentration that may result from this kind of distortions. So that is all, really. And I will stop here.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Minister. Thank you all. Our time is up. Have a nice evening here in Venezia.